Today I'm going to share 5 vocal tuning and automation mistakes that I've made over the years. By sharing my experiences, I want to help you to avoid these mistakes and stop you from wasting time figuring them out yourself. So if you want to learn how to use Melodyne 4 like a pro, keep watching. Hey, hope you're having a great week. Rob here from Musician on a Mission, and let's dive in with mistake number 1, which is not manually pitch correcting the vocal when you apply vocal tuning. Because a lot of plugins now, they have an auto tune feature where you can just set the key. So if we use the actual built-in pitch correction within Logic, you just set the key and it will figure it out and just shift it to the nearest thing. But that's not what we're focusing on here. If you want a professional, natural kind of vocal sound that you'd hear on the radio, then normally that's going to be using software like Melodyne or Antares Auto-Tune in the manual correction mode, or Waves Tune, something like that. If you want to go for that T-Pain corrected sound where it's over the top auto-tune, then sure, use a plugin like this. But if you want a natural sound where we're really subtly nudging the vocal in the right direction so it just sounds like a perfect performance, then you need to be manually doing it. And I did this wrong for years, and I just used the built-in Logic one, which was a huge mistake, because you can use this response time. If you use a slow response time, sometimes it can sound a little bit natural. Let's have a listen to this vocal here first. So this is the vocal just on its own.
Easy to love you. It's so easy to love you.
So let's focus on that little trill there, because that could do with some correction. Now this track, great track by David Tayo called It's So Easy to Love You. There's a link in the bio. And let's just bring in this auto-tune plugin and listen to how fake this sounds.
It's so easy to love you.
So we're getting that T-Pain blatant auto-tune sound. Sometimes that's what you're going for. But it took me years to figure out that if you want to create a natural sound where you can't even tell that pitch correction has been applied, then you need to do it manually. And to do that, you need a plugin like this, where you have this kind of view. Now, there's a few you can use. You can use Antares Auto-Tune, Melodyne. I use Waves Tune as well. I've tried that out. Honestly, they're all pretty good. I prefer Melodyne. It just happens to be the one that I bought. Auto-Tune is a bit more complicated to use, Antares Auto-Tune, but it also has a couple more features that I think are missing in Melodyne as far as I'm aware, or it just goes about in a different way. And Waves Tune, personally, I'm not a huge fan of, but I know other people get great results from that. It really depends on what kind of vocals you're working with. Personally, I've just always used Melodyne, so that's what I'm going to use in this video. Now, of course, you can do it to some degree. In Melodyne, you can highlight everything, click this button up here, which is the correct pitch window, and then we can just pull the center in for everything at once. And you can see here, it's just aligning them with the notes. So we could pull all the centers in, not by 100%, but I normally find around 80 works quite well. We can reduce the pitch drift as well and hit OK. And now we've kind of, in a sense, applied auto-tune. We haven't manually gone through and done every single note, but at the same time, when you have a bit that's important, a chorus, or if you have the time to actually go through and do this manually, that's always going to give you the best result, in that it will be the most subtle, the most accurate. So here we could just loop this section.
It's so easy to love you.
So you can already hear there's a bit of correction going on. So this is with no correction.
It's so easy to love you.
Whereas when we bring the center to 100% and the drift to 100%, now listen.
It's so easy to love you.
It really sounds much better, but that might be a bit drastic for a lot of the other sections. So let's bring those back down. And instead, what we're going to do here is just manually move this around. So I think it's this note here that's causing a lot of the issues, this vibrato.
It's so easy to love you.
Yeah, it's that melisma. It's not so much the vibrato, it's where he's sliding as he goes through that word. So we can just zoom in a bit here, and then we can grab this note and we can just adjust the actual note. Check that's right. And if we want, we can fine tune it.
It's so easy to love you.
So it's sounding a bit better.
It's so easy to love you.
If we want, we can then play around. If we right click here, we can go to the pitch drift tool and just pull that more in line so it's more consistent.
It's so easy to love you.
Then we've lost that melisma. So what we can also do, sometimes Melodyne doesn't get the split between the different notes quite right. So if we go back to that pitch drift and we bring this, And if we want, we can just type in here 0, so it's back to normal. We're going to use this tool instead, the note separation tool, to create a separate note out of this, and we can add a note there. Let's pull in this loop a bit so we're not listening to that first bit.
Love you. Love you.
And now we can just play with this one note.
Love you. Love you. Love you.
So it's a bit too quick to have that as a separate note. And this is just the manual process. It's going through using the various tools in Melodyne. The ones I find myself using the most are the ones on this. So pitch tool, and we can right click and we have the pitch modulation, which is gonna straighten that line out.
Love you.
There it sounds pretty odd because we've done that way too aggressively, but sometimes that's useful. We can just set this to 100% now to get it back to normal. And that pitch drift tool. So just using those to really fine tune this. And let's
Love
see.
you. Love you.
So this is without.
Love you.
And this is with.
Love you.
So it's sounding better, but it still needs a bit more work. But that process of manually fine tuning this, that's how you get a subtle, natural sound from the vocal while still applying quite heavy vocal tuning to make sure it's perfectly in pitch. And the degree that you do this, if you're working with pop music, you can go quite aggressive. Every note you might want to be pitch perfect. Whereas if you're working with rock music, something like that, you might not be as fast. So that was the first mistake that I wanted to share. You need to actually go and manually do a lot of this work. Now, mistake number 2 was that I applied pitch correction without the context of the track. I think early on, I got a version of Melodyne that I, for some reason, got into the habit of using in the standalone version. Rather than within the DAW like this, I just import the vocal, tune it, and then bring it back into my DAW. Now, it worked sometimes. It worked often, actually, but every now and then you'd get a track where it just didn't sit quite right because the guitars were slightly out of tune. Or there was just something else in the mix that was throwing that vocal off, even though it was in absolute correct note. So it might have been an absolute E, and I'm guessing this is tuned to 440. In the context of the mix, it actually sounded a tiny bit flat or a tiny bit sharp. So you need to do this in the context of the track instead. So what we can do here is just bring in everything if you want, or just harmonic parts. So we could just now solo the acoustic guitar as well, so that we've got that in there. And that gives us a harmonic background when we're tuning the vocal and we're fine tuning the sense, not just the note, but the actual sense here, where we're really getting between the notes and we're tuning that. You can't do that without some context. So let's keep working on this, but with that acoustic guitar in there now too. Bring that down.
Love you. Love you. Love you. Love you. Love you.
So this definitely still needs some work. So let's play around with the actual pitching.
Love you. Love you. Love you.
This one here as well. Let's reduce that drift slightly.
Love you. Love you.
Let's try reducing the modulation as well.
Love you. Love you. Love you.
And let's also try reducing this drift here between these two notes.
Love you. Love you.
And now it's sounding a bit too sharp, so let's bring that fine tuning down a bit.
Love you. Love you.
And maybe this note here could do with a bit of fine tuning.
Love you. Love you. Love you. Love you.
So this is before,
Love you.
and this is after.
Love you.
So it still sounds natural. It's still actually a little bit pitchy. It's not quite perfect, but I like that because it's not a pop track. It's kind of got a lot of folk elements to it. So we don't want it to be perfect. And quite often, if you can get away with it, the imperfections in the vocal are actually what makes it, adds that personality. Of course, if you're working on something for the radio, then maybe you do just want it to be perfect and we can keep working on this. But for me, that was a great improvement. That melisma there is now in tune, but it's not noticeable. It doesn't sound like it's been pitch corrected. And what I also find too is when you spend a lot of time focusing on a vocal, focusing on vocal tuning and the pitch, you start to notice some of the artifacts. So now after listening to this on repeat for ages, especially if we go back and solo that vocal, it might sound like it's really obviously auto-tuned.
Love you.
So on that last note, you can hear it a tiny bit, but trust me, no one will ever notice. Once you have this in the context of the mix and the vocal is mixed too and all the other instruments are in there, no one's going to be able to pick up on those artifacts from the vocal tuning. Of course, the more you focus on something, the more audible it becomes. So when you're doing it, it sounds really obvious, but generally it'll be fine. And the best thing to do is just finish vocal tuning, then have a break, come back, mix it. If you can still hear these really obvious artifacts or it sounds like it's been auto-tuned, then maybe go back and fix it. But I generally find once I finish vocal tuning, then I go have a break, come back, mix. I completely forgot that I even tuned the vocal. It's rare that I'll actually pick up on something and go, actually, that's really clearly auto-tuned. Let's move on now to mistake number 3, which is not comping the vocal. So it's really tempting to just find one good take. Maybe you did a few takes of the vocal and you just find the best one and it's good enough and you think, okay, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to use this take and any notes that are slightly out of tune, I can just pull up Melodyne and fix them. And in some cases, maybe that's the easy route, but I actually think it's quicker and way more effective to comp the vocal to quite a high level of detail, wherein you're even choosing the best word from a different take, or you're going through and doing it phrase by phrase rather than just picking the best take and then maybe comping out 1 or 2 bits. So to show you what I mean by this, I'm just gonna have to pull open another project. So here is an example of a track that's been heavily comped. And this is an earlier version of the song before it was mixed, anything like that. Just in the recording phase and then the editing phase, I've got this project here. Have a quick listen so you can just hear how it sounds pretty natural. It doesn't sound like tons of takes, but when you look, I'm actually comping loads of different takes here. And in total, there are at least 20 takes. Let's have a quick listen.
Don't forget we're on the ride to home. Nothing you can do to change it all.
And what you might notice as well is it already has a kind of polished sound to it. And this is with no mixing. There's a tiny bit of compression just so it sounds nice as I'm editing it and listening back to it. But it already has this very polished sound. And we're used to hearing comping on the radio. When we hear a vocal on the radio, it's going to be loads of different takes compiled into this perfect take. So as well as giving you lots more leeway for finding takes that are pitch perfect, it would also give you that polished sound too. So you need to go through, actually comp the vocal. You can see here I've got single words that I'm using, and in other cases there might even be words that are split over 2 takes. You can go really crazy with this, but you need to actually go through the effort of doing this. And that was a mistake that I made. I was lazy pretty much, didn't bother doing as much comping as I should have. But once you've properly comped the vocal, it means you don't have to do anywhere near as much pitch correction. Now this leads on nicely to mistake number 4, which is not recording enough takes. Now we're really starting to stray away from auto-tuning here, but it all comes back to how do we create the perfect vocal? And more specifically, how do we make sure the pitch is on point? And if you're going to comp, you're going to go through the effort of comping, you've only got 2 takes. Well, you don't have anywhere near as many options. You can see here, I've got loads of takes and I really should have cleaned them up, but full takes, we've got quite a lot just for this one section here. That's just one section. It's the same here. Now, this is because I'm a bad vocalist. I'll be honest. It's because a lot of the performances aren't great, so I had to record lots of takes to have it there. But even if you're working with a really, really good vocalist, you need at least 3 full takes, is my opinion, and 5 or so for difficult parts if they're a bit pitchy. If you have the luxury of doing more, then 5 full takes, even if they're a great vocalist, will just give you so much more to work with, and the end result is going to be that much better. And now finally, mistake number 5 is using bad software. Now, I've already covered the differences between Auto-Tune, Melodyne, Waves Tune, etc. But there are just so many plugins out there. I'm not going to say any are bad, but if you do a lot of vocal tuning, it's worth investing in good software like Melodyne or Antares Auto-Tune. I prefer those two to Waves Tune personally. Now, Logic, for example, actually has vocal tuning built in. If we turn on Flex for this vocal here, I can actually use pitch correction within Logic. Now, it's not too bad, it's passable, but if you want to do heavy pitch correction and vocal tuning, then something like Melodyne or Auto-Tune is just going to be more convincing. There aren't going to be as many artifacts, you get more control, and at the end of the day, you're going to get a better sound. Now, if you only dabble in pitch correction, you only want to do some minor vocal tuning every now and then the Logic software is pretty good. It has a lot of the same features. We can play with the pitch, we can also play with the drift. But if you find yourself doing it a lot or you want the best results, personally, I noticed that the quality of my vocals and the vocal edit specifically improved drastically when I invested in Melodyne, and I wish I'd done it sooner. So there you go, 5 things that I personally feel were mistakes that I made in the past that I learned from. Hopefully you can learn from them too. We covered quite a lot here today, so I put together a free vocal tuning cheat sheet that walks you through this process step by step and has some tips for using Melodyne too, so that you can actually apply this and make sure you get the vocal right every single time, because that's really important. Get the vocal right and the whole mix is going to sound great. So that's all from me. I'll see you next week, and remember, create regardless.